and I welcome. Thank you, sir. And I welcome all of you to our webinar today on sexual abuse, violence prevention in digital age. The title of today's webinar is Boundaries and Beyond, a Violence Prevention Journey. I'm honored to serve as your host, and today our facilitator for the webinar is Ms. Akriti Chaudhary. She has an extensive experience in psychological counseling at the Symbiosis Center of Emotional Wellbeing and other organizations. Currently, she's a doctoral scholar, and her work primarily consists of destigmatizing mental health and enhancing emotional well-being through individual and group sessions. Her contributions to mental health awareness and dedication to fostering positive change is commendable. Akriti, we are delighted to have you join us today as we delve into this crucial topic. Welcome you to the team.
Thank you so much. It's absolutely an honor to facilitate something for SKU. So it's definitely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So before we begin today's discussion, I just want to address the audience and give in a general trigger warning. The topics that we will be discussing or addressing will be very sensitive, and they will be related to sexual abuse and violence, which can be distressing for a lot of individuals. So we highly encourage you to prioritize your self-care and utilize the resources that are available to you if you find yourself in need of support during this discussion. With that being said, let's start today's session with the aim of shedding light on this complex issue of sexual violence and abuse, particularly in the digital realm. We will try and explore key concepts, share some insights, and discuss on actionable strategies. And we hope that we can equip everyone in the participants with knowledge and tools that can be necessary to foster a more safer and inclusive community, both on campus in an online and offline mode. We will be really appreciative if we can have people with their cameras on. And please feel free to ask some questions in the chat box. Towards the end of the webinar, we will have a Q&A section. So we will try and address your questions at that point of time. Okay, so to kickstart this discussion for today, Akriti, can we understand and delve into what exactly is sexual violence?
Sure. So I think I'd begin with clarifying that sexual violence is a more all-encompassing term for sexual assault, sexual harassment, sexual abuse, rape, and any other form of coercive act of getting any sexual activity. So, just to define sexual violence, therefore, it is an attempt to obtain a sexual act. It is a sexual act, and it is just any other direct or indirect act against someone's sexuality. Now, it can be irrespective of your relationship with the victim. So, it's not that if it's happening within a domestic setting, then it's not out of the scope of sexual violence. It still very much is within the scope of sexual violence. So, hence, sexual violence is just any attempt that you make at um, violently just getting any form of sexual activity. And this could happen at any setting, that's irrespective of settings. It could include, like I said, rape. It just include teasing, sexual harassment, whether at workplace, at institutional setups, any and everywhere. And basically, any form of sexual activity or attempt to obtain sexual activity that is non-consensual, where the victim did not get a chance to consent or wasn't even asked for it, would entail sexual violence. And hence, some of the key pointers for us to identify sexual violence would, number one, be there's no consent. And something that I read recently about consent, which I definitely want to share with everyone here. Um, Consent can be identified as this acronym called FRIES. Now it sounds very weird, but I'll explain it. F stands for freely given. So consent has to be freely given. You're not supposed to be coerced into it. You're not supposed to be forced into it. Your yes does not have to come out of any other form of manipulation or persuasion. It has to be free. Second, it's reversible. So you could consent to something and then withdraw your consent, and that very much does, come under your right to consent. So FRI is, it has to be immediate. If it's not, it could be, just let me get back to it. I'll think about it, and it's informed. It's not that I am intoxicated when I'm providing consent. It does not purely come under consent. So it has to be informed. And it does not have to be like, oh, I need a yes here and now. You can take your time to think about it, evaluate all the options. It has to be enthusiastic, you're not giving consent just for the sake of, okay, let me make my friend happy, let me make my partner happy, let me make this strange, or it's just out of courtesy that I'm providing consent. No, try and refrain from that. And finally, S stands for specific. Make it very, very clear what you're consenting to. Right. So that's number one reminder of, just an indicator of how you can identify sexual violence. And yeah, I mean, I hope that answers your question about sexual violence.
Right, it does. And like you said, there are so many different forms of understanding consent of what is sexual violence. I think it's really important that we are today talking about it so that we can identify what different components come under that. Now, when we are talking about consent and different cases that have happened, what is the scope and magnitude of the issue at hand, keeping in mind, the digital environment that we are in today?
So I love this question. Just the magnitude and scope is definitely immense. There are so many statistics worldwide talking about how it's impacting all genders. There was this 2023 statistic by WHO which talked about 246 million girls and women all over the world have experienced sexual violence with their intimate partners at least once in their lives, and the age range of this statistic was 15 to 49. But there is so much more that's beyond reported. And we'll talk later, of course, about the factors which are why the underreporting happens. But just in terms of the magnitude is immense. It's so much. There's this another study that talked about how in the US, almost half women had experienced sexual violence in one form or the other throughout the course of their lives. And 1 in 3 men had experienced something similar. But of course, it's not that everything was reported, right? So simply talking about just India, let's say, there was this NCRB data which talked about so many, I mean, almost like 31,000 rape cases were reported in 2021, So, and this is just rape. So many sexual harassment, sexual assault cases are just not reported. I work at a university, and unfortunately, I see so many students um, share their horror stories, their traumatic stories of having to experience one or the other form of sexual violence in their lives, and they were never asked to report it. They were never asked to take any action against it. So I mean, the problem is huge and it's very, very deep rooted. And especially in, when you talk about digital environments, it's something very new. I don't know if you've heard the term sextortion. This is a new term that has come up, which talks about how people are, extorting money, using sexual harassment, sexual violence as a form. So, of course, we all know, we've widely heard about how so many, nude pictures are just shared or just made viral over the internet out of revenge, out of just heartbreak. we've and that goes again for all genders. It's definitely most commonly reported for women, but that also happens with the other genders. Just this, I think I'd share this experience that happened with another one person that I had. I don't know, it was very unfortunate, but I had the fortunate pleasure of him trusting me with this information. But he just met someone on while he was out at a cafe, and they got to talking and they liked each other. They exchanged numbers, and Monday he randomly wakes up and he gets a video call from this girl. So of course they've met, they know each other. So he picks it up, and there's this some other woman who's stripping in front of him, and they take screenshot of this, and then they exit the call. They leave it, and then they keep blackmailing this man to extort money out of him. They keep threatening him that I'm going to use this image and I'm going to circulate it in all of your networks. So the digital aspect has made it so easy for you to use your anonymity, for you to have access to everybody's contact lists, everybody's friend lists. You know everybody's vulnerabilities. So many on let's say this social media platform called Instagram. There are so many cases of people using fake profiles to ask for pictures, to send pictures. So digital space has just given that room for people. I'd say to unfortunately amplify the concerns. It's easier for them to harass people on such platforms. And of course, there are multiple factors which contribute to it. The biggest one being you're anonymous, you're not accountable. Nobody knows um, who it is behind that one contact number, behind that one username. For this man also who was sharing his experience with me, he said, I blocked her number and then she called me within seconds with another number, within seconds with a third number. They had to block this woman's 10 contact numbers to finally get rid of them. And again, he could not report it to anyone else because there was just some sense of fear, shame, lack of awareness, what to do about it. I wasn't participating in it. I did not consent to it, but it just somehow happened to me. Um, and yeah, I mean, digital spaces have just unfortunately given so much room for people to engage in such acts. It's made, I think, everybody's lives very accessible, very pervasive. Like I can literally get into any of your account details. I can get into knowing who you're talking to, and I can use that against you. So it's made everyone very vulnerable to that. And the biggest problem being, so it's so difficult to report, it's so difficult to just take cognizance of everything that's happening every other time, because how many contact numbers are you going to report, how many trolls are you going to report and block? So it's definitely making the scope wider and the problem much more deep rooted than it already was.
Right. And I completely agree with you. It's like the more we are using these digital platforms, the more the risk of having these crimes is increasing. And like you said, I think the right way to put it is like having a faceless crime. Then how do you deal with that, right? When you're not able to identify. And like this recent studies coming, or recent instances coming in, I'm not sure if you have heard of it, deep fake profiles coming up where people are just taking their pictures. There was also another instance of school boys who were creating chat rooms on online platforms where they were sharing pictures of their female friends and just using it for illicit purposes. But yeah, the issue is so massive, and it's so difficult to just constrain it, or even to start understanding how do we start measuring, or how do we start using different measures to address it. And when we are on this topic, like you said, that it does not have a gender. Anyone can be a victim of this. I am wondering what could be the impact on an individual level for a person who has to go through this, or who has been through this.
Again, I think it's just so scary. It's horrific almost to understand that, it could affect anyone at any point of time. And when you look at the impact, so it obviously differs for every kind of, depending on the kind of abuse, kind of violence that you're subjected to, depending on your individual factors, just the support you have around you, depending on your age, gender, depending on your family, friend networks, depending on, how easy it is for you to access legal care, trauma care, medical care. It definitely varies a lot depending on all of these factors. But some of the major impacts that I want to talk about, and I do want to mention, they're not just unfortunately related to the individual, they definitely affect their families and the community at large. But specifically for individuals, the biggest one being, just this, of course, physical impact. I see so many students who just don't have good relationship with their bodies anymore. They develop such sense of hate or disgust towards certain body parts simply because that was subjected to violence in some form. I mean, and this I'm talking apart from the physical impact of having any sort of bruising or swelling or any sort of physical injury. Just this relationship with your body is it's just changed forever. Which also brings me to the psychological impact of post-traumatic stress disorder. Unfortunately, a lot of individuals who may have experienced some kinds of abuse which were extreme for them, um, they may have flashbacks, they may have recurrent memories, which makes them vulnerable to, depression or anxiety. It definitely leads to problems in their interpersonal relationships. Your social skills are affected because I now feel, I don't know, disgust about my own self. I feel guilty. I would very naturally withdraw myself from everywhere and every interaction possible. I would not want to go out there, have fun simply because I just don't have it in me anymore. So when you're constantly overthinking it, when you're feeling very bad about everything that has happened, your social skills are affected. It's so difficult for you to get back into normalcy, which would definitely major part of our lives, is work. But your work is affected. I mean, they're focused victims of, and there are a lot of statistics around it. Victims of sexual violence of any kind have reported, lesser focus levels, lesser energy levels, lesser productivity, lesser opportunities for promotion and growth at their workplaces. Um, Even in terms of marital relationships, outside of work, when I talk about not just interpersonal, I mean, inclusive of marital relationships in interpersonal relationships, specifically, I want to talk about how it affects their ability to have intimate relationships with their partners. Um, it's difficult to have a relationship with your own body and then to actually allow somebody else to be intimate with you, think about your family, think about living a normal life. It's it's I think every age offers a different challenge for you, and you have to overcome that challenge consistently, which is very draining for any victim of sexual violence. And one more thing that I think it often leads to, which unfortunately again I'm seeing a lot with the kind of students that I'm seeing here, is that now it makes them vulnerable to substance abuse, engaging in risky behaviors, rash driving, just to get rid of those thoughts, just to get rid of that feeling. Um, Sometimes they may get into abusive or toxic relationships where they feel constantly punished because they feel at least they are cared for, at least this is stable, at least this is constant, even if it's, even if my partner is yelling at me, even if my partner could be physically attacking me, at least he's not sexually abusing me. That becomes the benchmark, unfortunately. So it makes them more vulnerable to being in violent or toxic or abusive relationships. And because that just becomes um, their mindset.
Right. So there are so many like different categories where someone can be impacted, right? And I remember talking to a student for a couple of months, and they had faced a similar issue, but it was in childhood. Until now, even after reaching adulthood, it impacts so much that even if it stops becoming the defining moment, but to overcome from that challenge and to have it affect every aspect of yourself, how you identify yourself, how you have your relation, how you have a relationship with yourself, not just body but your self concept as well, is being hampered a lot. Plus this feeling of, like you said, that there are different benchmarks then they're set up, that okay, this is healthy, this is not healthy, and I have been through something that is not healthy. So that barrier also becomes a little bit distorted, that what exactly is a healthy relationship, what can be considered acceptable, what cannot be considered acceptable, right? And it so like I think it permeates so much into our everyday lives, that even if it's not completely visible, that okay, this is primarily, or this could be one of the reasons that why they are facing this difficulty. But I've seen executive functions being impaired because of that, specifically if it has happened during childhood, and then it has also led to neurodivergent diagnosis as well in adulthood. So like you said, that there's a massive impact on individual. And talking about this, would you be able to shed some light on the impact of on the community level as well then?
See, if a community is growing up with individuals who have certain setbacks in their lives due to, just sexual violence of any kind, you are bound to not have a very thriving, flourishing, happy, safe community. So, I mean, the number one thing is that I do not feel safe in my community anymore. I'm constantly scared. I do not trust my people around. So there's this sense of, there's loss of trust, and there's this sense of fear for my safety, which creeps in, for my physical safety, for my psychological safety. And when you're living in a community like that, of course, the sense of me feeling belonged in a community is hampered, right? When you talk about, let's say, community growth, right? A nation is made up of so many communities who are working towards certain economic goals. Every community is fulfilling certain economic responsibilities. If I am not feeling belonged in my community, if I'm not feeling safe in my community, how would that motivate me to contribute to my community purposefully in any manner? I would not. I simply would not, because I do not feel cared for. I do not feel safe. What would motivate me to, push myself and be productive? So, when we're letting go of such acts of sexual violence at a community level, we're also encouraging this behavior, and we're encouraging a lot of individuals who feel unsafe to continue to feel that way, which hampers their motivation, which hampers their willingness, and which reinforces the behavior of the perpetrators, because the perpetuation of violence continues in communities like these. So at a community level, there's definitely the quality of life is decreased. You do not feel like you do not feel like you want to wake up and contribute to your society in any manner, right? And I think that's the biggest impact that we as a society are also dealing with, and we're trying to overcome. That's why so many government policies trying to focus on specific populations, specific, special populations, special kids, women oriented. Why? Because we know that these special populations, these classes of populations have felt neglected, have felt harmed in some manner. So now we're trying to give them special permissions and special policies in favor of them, so that they feel like they can contribute, they feel belonged in this community. So that, I think, that would be my answer to the community level impact.
Right. And when we are talking about not feeling safe in our own community, in our own society, this is what I have seen. And please just pitch in if you have also witnessed this with your students as well. That there's a lot of fear regarding being vulnerable. There's a lot of uh, like trust issues in the case of that. Okay, if I'm sharing something with them, even if it's just a very personal secret or just personal life story, would they use it to harm me? Right, there's a lot of fear of vulnerability that I am seeing in students today and even the younger generation, because we are all growing up with that fear of, okay, there is a very harmful digital world out there where we cannot put out ourselves because of this fear that, okay, anything and everything that we put out there can be used in order to just harm us or to get back at us. Has this been a common theme that you have witnessed?
For sure. I mean, see, when I'm a member of society, and unfortunately, and I think you can also relate to this when I say there may have been so many instances growing up where you have just been eve teased, where somebody just randomly passes by you and they hit you in some way. Just, and for them, it's just fun. It's like, oh, we're walking, so what? Unfortunately, a lot of men also, like I said, it's irrespective of gender. I can say that, once in their lives, everybody experiences just some non-consensual, forced physical act targeted against their sexuality. And when I'm growing up like that, where do I feel safe? And often people go to their families, people might open up to their friends about it. But the kind of response that we then provide to them matters on whether they actually take any action against it or they don't. Most families, so I was reading this survey in the US where they conducted this research just 2 years ago. Um, and this was about childhood sexual abuse experienced by men. Um, about 50 to 60% of men did open up about their childhood sexual abuse experiences. But 15 years later, the average was 15 years later after they had experienced this, is when they had opened up. Now, of course, multiple factors contributing to it. But what was also interesting, and one of the biggest factors that they only claimed, and this was done in a clinical interview, was only 36% of the 50% who had opened up received positive responses, received validation, received sympathy, received some form of support for opening up. The rest of them experienced negative responses, which included a lot of blame, which included a lot of shame. And they ended up experiencing disgust and guilt, because especially for men who are supposed to be the protectors of the entire humankind. Um, if anybody wants to open up about the sexual violence they have experienced, we are all just going to look at them in a way like, oh, how could you? I mean, how can you? And it becomes like a label they have to live with. How can you protect me when you can't protect yourself? Unfortunately, that becomes even more exemplified for men. And for women, I mean, that just becomes one of the things that controls them. Another instances that I'd want to share is recently a client opened up to me about a sexual harassment episode. So this was a work colleague, but this happened outside of their workspace. And she was constantly feeling like, oh, I should let it go. It's not a big deal. Um, you know, if I complain, if I raise a complaint, I'll probably make a bigger deal of it than it already is. And we really had to work so much on challenging that narrative, who told you it's not a big deal? Because when we're doing that, we're ultimately reinforcing the perpetuator's behavior. We are telling them that, it is okay, it can happen. So it was so important for us to challenge that narrative and to let her know that it's okay for her to take action against it. And interestingly, she had grown up experiencing a lot of sexual harassment and assault episodes, and her parents had always told her to not make a big deal about it. And when she did tell them and yell at them and break down because of the impact that it had on her, they asked her to not leave the home. So the kind of response that you got on reporting is you control yourself, you limit yourself, which definitely makes people not open up. It makes them feel like, you know what, I have to let it go because if I don't, it's going to curb my freedom. It's going to bring me shame and guilt instead of the other way around, which is a huge, and it has to change. It must change because if I'm like, I am sorry, I sort of derailed a little bit coming back to your question, that does leave me vulnerable to a society. And now, when I'm being vulnerable, my vulnerabilities are being used against me. Why would I want to grow up in a community like that?
Definitely, and there are so many instances. Like, I remember speaking with a colleague, and she was facing the same concern with one of her clients. The In the initial few sessions, the client did believe that, okay, maybe I think when I was at a college party, I was intoxicated, and I think I have been raped. But that revelation in itself was such a huge thing for that client that by the next session, it was like, oh, no, no, I think I remembered it wrong. The intoxication part of it was so shameful that I wasn't aware. I did not take care of myself. So definitely the other person went for it. The amount of shame, the amount of guilt, and like you said, upon reporting, the responses that we get. I remember reading a newspaper article right around the time when this Me Too movement was going on. And till that time, there was not a lot of stats available for how are men impacted, what are the crimes committed against men. But after this moment, there was a small percentage of rise of men also reporting. They found that courage. And I think that is one of the kind of societies that maybe we should strive and create a space wherein it's okay and safe to talk about what you have gone through, so that people who are responsible of providing justice or of providing any sort of support can help us. But our work or any other organization's work can only come in when we are able to have this discussion and spread this knowledge and awareness that this can happen, anyone can be a victim of it, and it's important that they get a space wherein they can talk about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. I do not have anything to add to that, but I think you literally summarized it very well.
So I remember you saying that the preventative measures should not just be focused on, okay, how do we then curb the victims who have been there. So are there any proactive measures that we can take, so in order to either prevent this from happening, or we can do something to create or start building a more safer space, at least in a university setup, like we are in an education setup. So on that level, can we start doing something?
See, definitely, I want to talk about first how important it is we do something about it because we've talked about the statistics, we've talked about the impact it has, we've talked about the magnitude of the concerns. And also, I don't feel like we're targeting any special population here when we're talking about the interventions. We're talking about just the society at large, and so the interventions need to happen. And I want to take the opportunity to say that it's not a specific day or a week or a month. It should happen almost every other month. The awareness has to come there. It's so central. The reason being, I feel like as a society, so, we've been westernized to an extent that, so many of this younger generation, they're open to dating apps, they're open to seeing people, they're open to exploring a lot more about their sexuality than probably the previous generation was 5 years, 7 years ago. I don't think dating apps were that common, right? But now that they are, unfortunately, what could not keep up with the change is our perception of our sexuality. So, as Indian society, we've always been inherited and we've internalized this belief in ourselves that obviously sexual intimacy is something I hold sacred to me because the entire society looks down upon it if I let it go. Right. So this has to be how I identify myself because this is how others will take care of me and others will identify me. Now, when I am in a society where there's this peer pressure of dating, of going out, having explorations on dating apps and stuff, but I have this belief in me that, oh, I'm not sure about what I'm open to in terms of any sort of sexual activity. I do not know what to give consent to, but some things just happen to me. You're left in a state of confusion. You don't know what just happened, and you know it doesn't feel right, but you don't know whether did I invite it? Was I responsible for it? Did the other person just take advantage? Did the other person, use any form of coercion or manipulation? And that is why we need to have a lot of educational intervention. So just to answer, your intervention aspect of it all, at SKEW, at Symbiosis Center for Emotional Wellbeing, we use sort of like a three-step model, which is preventative, promotive, and curative. So I'm just going to try and identify the interventions in that model. When we talk about preventative, let's start at the community level. Let's start about what the policymakers can do, how they can talk about, mandating gender sensitization workshops, mandating sexual health awareness workshops. I mean, it's high time we let go of this pedagogy where girls are taught about periods and men are not, where, sex education classes are happening separately for girls and boys in the same classroom. They have to go back to the same classroom, but when the training is happening, they're sitting in separate rooms because just the instructor, the trainer is so uncomfortable with the thought of having to teach all of this. And imagine when we are growing up in that society, I don't know what's okay, I don't know what's acceptable. And so I don't realize when to stop also. So the consent may never be informed if I'm not educated like that, if I've not had conversations around it, right? So I mean, as policy level, mandating all of such workshops, creating national level awareness campaigns. Thankfully, a few Bollywood movies are also talking about sexual violence, about sexual education, like Oh My God 2, or this movie called Satya Prem Ki Katha talked about how date rape really left her marital relationship in shambles. So I think that's what we're doing at a community level intervention. That's what I mean, that we need to have these conversations. Another level at preventative, like you said, we're in an educational setting. So how do we take care of that? How many staff faculty members are trained in sex education, in gender sensitization? What is the relevance? They don't understand what's the relevance for us in it. They don't know that if there are two students in a classroom who may be engaging in any form of, public display of affection, how to deal with that? They don't know what to say, where to draw the boundary. The child may feel offended, and you just don't know how to have conversations around it. So I think that may be an important thing to think about. I think sessions like these, just a lot of workshops, a lot of trainings, a lot of awareness conversations, events to make sure that people talk about it and people see it and people recognize that they can do something about it is very, very important. It takes off so much load off of me because I'm being taught growing up. I don't have to grow up and learn all of it on my own as and when it happens to me. If I'm prepared already, I know how to give consent. I know where to draw my boundaries. I know what to allow. I know what not to allow. It just enables me to take more personal responsibility so that I don't feel like a victim all the time. Right. So that's what, just preventative level, national level, and institutional levels also will actually enable us to break that cycle. And I don't think we've recognized the power of educational awareness sessions yet enough. In promotive, I would want to take the opportunity to talk and learn about the resources we already have. So I know there, for example, National Commission for Women. When I opened the site for it today, and I can also put it in the chat box if any of the audience members want it. They talk about crisis intervention numbers, helplines. They talk about legal aid centers, which are going to give free support to anybody who needs it. Right now, of course, it's unfortunate that I could only find it on National Commission for Women. But what if a person of any other gender is in requirement of it, where they can reach is again out of question. So in an institutional setup, we can probably, what we can take is make people aware of the internal complaints committee, make people aware of posh, make people educate people about posh, educate people about POXO, not just because they will have children so they have to take care. Everybody may have some younger cousin, some younger relative, or even if you see it happening for any other random child, be an ally and report it. That's you have enough resources, make use of them. Make sure every student at your institution knows the helpline numbers, the national helpline number, 181 for posh. How many of us know it? So I feel like we have started taking care of it. We have resources, most important resource being your family and your friends, people who are fortunate enough to have that strong network of trusted people, of people who could care for them, who could love them. Try and get their support. Open up. You know, if you feel like you won't judge them for anything that they open up to you about, then I'm sure you would not have chosen friends who would judge you. So try and open up to them. Get support. Um, I think a lot of faculty trainings, staff, student trainings with the workshops that are already there, with the resources that we already have, just strengthening the systems, making these accessible. How do I raise a complaint to an ICC, right, at any institute? Do I have access to those numbers? Do I have access to those mails? I do not, right? Fortunately, at Symbiosis, every campus has an ICC, and make use of it. Go and just take screenshots, spread it in your classroom. If somebody needs it, they can use it. So, also, we need to see how accessible these resources are and how to strengthen them, right? If somebody is reporting, what do you do about that report? That is a very promotive aspect of reporting of self violent of sex violent crimes. If I am reporting, if I'm gathering the courage. So, for example, this another client was talking to me about raising a posh complaint at her workplace. And she said 10 different people had called me and verified and asked to repeat the entire story. I mean, that would demotivate her to report at all. You remove her from that workplace to shift her to another place. You're bringing all the spotlight on her. She is the one who's changing her entire situation. Why would I want to complain? I would rather want to let it go. Yeah, the pressure is so much. So, how you make sure that you're making it accessible and actually feasible for somebody who's already coming out and reporting. And lastly, I know I've been talking a lot, but just lastly, in terms of curative intervention, I want to talk about how accessible is legal aid for them, how is accessible is counseling or therapy for them for any of the trauma work required, the medical care. These are all parts of curative interventions. How much do they have access to it? um, do you actually the confidentiality of it all, how the stakeholders get involved and how they take care of the victim, then how do you support them, how do you enable them and empower them? That would all be part of the curative intervention aspect of it.
Thank you so much for sharing all of these pointers. I do want to come back to one point wherein you mentioned that to making these resources accessible, and this is my take on it, that why it's important is that once people know, once they're aware, like you said, everyone should know this. This should be a general knowledge, either on an institutional level or on a national or a societal level, that know what the emergency helpline numbers are. Because I believe this is our human responsibility, right? This is our personal responsibility, that even though there can be times either we might need it, someone we know might need it, or someone, a stranger can also need it, and in case we are in a position to help them, then why not, right? And the other point to this is that once we know what we can do as general citizens to help someone or to educate someone, I think it can put us in a sense of ease. Because right now, as I mentioned, everyone is living in a very anxious world of, okay, anything can go wrong at any point of time. We can become victim at any point of time because of this digital space, this digital environment, and our reliance on technology so much. But if we are aware of, okay, these are the measures, this is what are the measures that are in place, I think it can put us in some sense of ease. And also not feel that if something comes up urgently, we won't react to it in a panic state, right? Because most of the times what happens is, even let's say with parents or with anyone else who is on an authority position, if something comes to them and they are not aware how to deal with the situation, the instinctive reaction could be, okay, how can this happen? And, oh, you might have done something wrong. That is coming out, this is what I believe, again, and I can be wrong, but that can be coming from a place of, okay, I don't know how to deal with the situation. And I think as this is what we owe to our stakeholders, that we train them, we tell them that these are the measures, these are the resources that the entire university is providing you. Start talking about it, have conversations on a more often a basis. Teach people this, new students, incoming students, outgoing students, that this is what our community is for. So that point is really something that I wanted to give in my views. But yeah, please feel free to share if there's anything else that comes up.
No, I think you did definitely add up really well. And yeah, I mean, that just enables, we were talking about feeling belonged in a community. And when I feel like I have control to take care of myself and somebody else around who needs any sort of assistance or support, I would feel supported. I would feel cared for as a community. I know that I have, let's say at Symbiosis, we followed this program of mental health champions. I know there are mental health champions who are student volunteers, who are advocates of mental health, who would help me reach the right resources. So then, are we training the mental health champions for it? So I would feel supported and cared for, and that would also help all of us at a community level.
Right, and because this is a very sensitive issue, dealing with it in the same sensitive manner is really important. And I'll I'll come back to another point that you mentioned when you were talking about a client who had reported in the workplace, but she was the one who had been going through a lot, making all the changes. So sometimes, even after having the resources, it can feel like, okay, the victim is the one who has to change a lot. They are the one that come in the limelight, but how do we deal with it in a more sensitive manner? That if they are going through this, how can we make it not more traumatizing for them, right? Yeah, like we are on this topic, you have been talking about educative programs, creating workshops, and what is your take on its impact?
The impact of interventions.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I mean, when you ask me the impact, I'm going to tell you how all the negative consequences that I've talked about, the negative impact that I've talked about, how much we can reduce that. I am not going to go ahead and promise that, we will be able to remove crime at all or reduce sexual violence to a very nominal, negligible level. I don't think we can give such, false positive statements or facts. But what I can definitely talk about is at an individual level, I feel validated, I feel supported, I feel cared for. When I'm attended to, when I come out and I feel like I am attended to, I'm validated, I would be supported through counseling. I may be supported through legal aid. It would definitely improve the relationship that I have with myself, with my body. It would make sure that that trauma does not define my entire existence, but also the resources I have, the support I have, the strength and the resilience I have to stand against what I was, just what I had to bear with. Um, that also forms a strong part of my identity. I that would enable me to um, get out there, probably initiate conversations, talk to people. That would improve my social relationships. Once through counseling, once through medical and legal care, I feel supported and validated. I feel like I have a stand. I have some control to stand against what had just happened to me. It would change. I wouldn't say it would not make that trauma part of you anymore. It would still be, but you'll be open to have more experiences over that trauma, which would reduce the impact that it would have had earlier on. If there's no intervention, no talking about it, I feel like I'm the only one who had to experience it. Nobody else can understand me. I would not be able to add any experience simply because I am not able to get out of what I had just experienced. So when you feel understood and when you feel in a community very supported, that's the impact it has. In an individual level, I am much more than what I have just experienced, which will improve my social relationships, which will enable me to engage in perhaps some sort of intimate relationship or marriage. It would enable me to do better at my employment, be more productive, be more purposeful. It would enable me to think about the other things that define me and my life. And at a community level, for sure, I would feel like I am growing up in a community which can be more productive. I would have, just find myself contributing in some meaningful way. And so, for example, for all the examples that we've talked about throughout the session, there is a reason they opened up to us, to all the counselors across SIU, and they felt they could trust them enough. They felt they were validated and heard enough. And just that in itself, I'm sure most of the mental health professionals in the field can vouch for it. Just that itself, just them trusting you and receiving a positive response, enables them to move beyond the horizon of just this one traumatic experience. It just makes room for a little more. So, I mean, that's the impact of interventions that I can think of right now.
Thank you so much for sharing all these insights and views about all the questions that I've asked. And I completely agree with you. Like you said, that it will just help us combat this anxious environment a little bit at a time, one step at a time. How we are supporting ourselves, those near us, and it's really important. With this, I bring all of us to the end of this webinar. I'm really appreciative of having you here. It was an honor having this discussion with you. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to ask us questions, or do they want to share any viewpoints on the discussion that we have been having?
I guess there are no questions, so we can just move ahead and close for the day.
Yes. I think that brings us to the end of the webinar. And once again, from the entire on the behalf of the entire SKU team, I really thank you for having us, and agreeing to come on this webinar and sharing your insights, and coming to these discussions based on your experiences. Thank you so much. And thank you so much everyone who has been able to take out time and join us on this insightful conversation. I really hope that this helped us think of ways we can indulge in conversations, and we can keep this agenda going of creating a more safer, of more inclusive and sensitive environment for everyone included. Thank you so much, everyone. Sir, I think we can stop the recording.